Amuni pancha stanani Dharma Prabhava Kali Autareyena Dattani Nyavasatani Desha Krita. Amuni, all those, pancha, 5, stanani, places, he, certainly, adharma, irreligious principles, prabhava, encouraging, Kali, the age of Kali, Autareyena, by the son of Uttara, Dattani, delivered, Nyavasat, dwell, Tat, by him, Nideshakrit, directed. Translation, thus the personality of Kali by the directions of Maharaj Parikshit, the son of Uttara, was allowed to live in those 5 places. Purport, thus the age of Kali began with gold standardization and therefore falsity, intoxication, animal slaughter, and prostitution are rampant all over the world. And the saner section is eager to drive out corruption. The counteracting process is suggested above, and everyone can take advantage of this suggestion. So the previous verse described how Kali begged for some places to live in. So Parikshit Maharaj gave him these different places where there is falsity, which means lying and cheating, where there's intoxications, where there is lust, or kama, where there is envy, and where there is enmity. Of this, the gold one is the extra one, because with gold, everything, all the other sinful activities result. We saw the 4 legs of Dharma were there, including truthfulness and non-violence and compassion, etc. Cleanliness, tapas, which means sense control, these are destroyed in Kali Yuga, represented by the bull getting his 4 legs depleted until there's no leg left. In Satya Yuga we have all these principles intact, and in Kali Yuga we have, starting with Kali Yuga, 1/4 intact, and then as Kali Yuga progresses, even the last leg of Dharma gets finished. No? And to counteract these principles of Dharma, then we have all of these sinful activities, such as intoxication, meat eating, gambling, etc. Kali prospers where these activities, sinful activities, are propagated. And in addition, the 5th place was where gold is hoarded. That place also becomes the place of Kali, because where we have gold, then we get all the sinful activities manifested in abundance. So by gold, we don't mean just gold in itself, because the kings also had gold. We see that Yudhisthira had wealth of gold also. But it's the hoarding of gold. And here Prabhupada mentions the standardization of gold, that wealth is measured in terms of gold. Because of this, people could independently start to become wealthy. And then they have this money, and what do they do with it? They indulge in all the sinful activities. And they can also earn more of this money by engaging other people in sinful activities. So in this way, the whole society becomes filled with illicit, sinful activities. Now technically, everything is controlled by the king. So the king levies taxes. And in this way, the whole society benefits from the wealth. When we have people hoarding the wealth, well, this means that they are taking it all for themselves, then the population doesn't benefit, and the person becomes greedier and greedier with no sense of duty or compassion, and thus sinful activities result. So the basic question would be, what is wrong with sinful activities? Because we see that actually most of societies in the world have these activities, and they are propagated like just as normal life. And if you close down the pubs and the prostitution houses and the nightclubs and the gambling houses, everybody freaks out, as they're doing now. And the first thing they want back after the lockdown is they want to have these things open, otherwise they're so frustrated. And in some countries it's so wild that they don't want any of this to be closed down at all, and they protest that it's our right to do all these activities and be closing us up. So we see that it's a common, in the modern world, it's just a common, we could say almost a need of people to enjoy all these sinful activities. Now, of course, we can say there are degrees of this. Okay, do a little bit of drinking, a little bit of gambling, not a problem, but then if you go overboard, then it is a problem. That's true. And we see that even in the Vedic society, this was also recognized. So therefore, they did have drinking. Kshatriyas could drink. And we see even in the end of the Yadu dynasty, the Yadus all got drunk. So the lower parts of society, they can drink, but the Brahmins don't drink. And we know that meat was also evident. So Prabhupada says, you want to eat meat, then at least you sacrifice it or offer it to Kali or something like that, or horse sacrifice or cow sacrifice or whatever you want to do. So there were prescriptions for meat also. And of course we have the somaras, part of the Vedic ritual. They're considered an intoxicant also. So there is, intoxication, meat eating. And we see gambling was there among the Kshatriyas. We have the famous case of the Pandavas gambling away their own wife. And we see even in Krishna's pastimes, they're gambling. Radha and Krishna are throwing dice and gambling also. So there's, gambling is there also. So we got all these sinful activities going on in one sense, but they're kept under control. So therefore, and the king can go out and kill animals, etc. like that. But then it's also said that the king who is intoxicated with hunting or gambling, then he's not a king anymore. So there was limitations on all these different activities. And the higher you go in society, the more limitation. Until we get to the Brahmana, then if you touch liquor, you're like contaminated. What to speak of drinking it, even if it's in the house or you touch it, then you're really contaminated and you have to bathe and wash and purify your house, etc. So though these sinful activities were there in the Varnashram system, they were very, very limited. So the problem comes when all of these things are unlimited and there's no regulation in Kali Yuga. Or we could say it becomes very popular. And problem is, all these things become addictive. People want more and more of these sinful activities, and it's very difficult to restrict people once it starts. So, we have the rules of Dharma to restrict. And of course there's different restrictions on different varnas, etc., and different ashramas. And if we follow that, at least society, everybody kind of gets satisfied. They are restricted, but they get their satisfaction anyway. And the sense gratification, the extreme sense gratification, is traded in for moderation of the senses, and at the same time, a long-term peaceful existence. Rather than you go extreme sense gratification and no existence in the future at all, don't care about the future existence, have an unstable society. So that's the trade-off. Have a stable society that lasts a long time, and you moderate your sense gratification. So that is, you could say, that what the Varnashram system does, and it does it, we can say, maybe a little more strictly than other civilizations in the world would do. But still, there's some leeway for the sense gratification. So this is one level of spiritual life, but it's also not the highest. We know that Dharma is there, and this whole section is emphasizing a lot about Dharma and, destruction of Dharma, the four legs of Dharma, etc. And the result of the destruction of this is the destruction of the earth. When the bull is suffering, then the cow suffers. When Dharma is finished, earth also stops giving. So what is the result of that? Human beings suffer because there's no more food, there's no more water. Everything is irregular. So that's, we can say, the material aspect. The artha disappears. The bare maintenance for humans to survive, things become less and less as Kali Yuga goes on, due to the increase in sinful activities. So that's, we can say, the artha and dharma and kama. That's how they're related. Restrict the kama, and then your artha is sufficient to survive into the future and survive and prosper, etc. By following dharma. But we know that that's not the ultimate goal of life from the Vedic point of view. Therefore, they have moksha, or getting out of the material world, as the next stage. And of course, we can say that beyond moksha we get prema, or we can say that moksha consists of two things. One is the impersonal moksha, and the liberation in the spiritual world, which you say is prema again. So anyway, there's the higher aspect that we can't forget. We have this lower aspect. We can't just put in the system and forget about the higher system. And in fact, the two things go together, and you cannot just operate with this system without the other system. That is the spiritual system intact also. It doesn't work. It is like a karma yoga without Jnana yoga, Astanga yoga, and Bhakti yoga. It's only one step. And if you try to implement independently, it doesn't work. So therefore, Bhagavatam says the whole Varnashram system ultimately depends upon satisfaction of the Lord. So there has to be a spiritual connection between this system of restricting the senses and enjoying with worship of the Lord. So therefore, this is one level of benefiting society, establish a Varnashram system properly. But the other aspect is establishing the spiritual society, the spiritual education society. And if that's not there, then this one also fails. Even if you try to establish your Varnashram system, if you don't have the spiritual one, it doesn't work. So you have to have both. And there's a relationship between them. Generally, this society is more favorable for spiritual life than a disruptive, discontinuous, passionate, ignorant society. It's very difficult to practice spiritual life there. So therefore, this is a favorable, having these restrictions of the Varnashram system are favorable for the development of devotional service. And therefore we'll see that though Lord Chaitanya rejected Varnashram system and Karma Yoga as inferior and let's say not directly the highest goal, still he also accepted it. So Lord Chaitanya himself acted within that system. When he was in his household life, he acted as a householder and followed the rules. When he took sannyas, then he was still within that system. He acted within the system and he followed the rules of that system, more or less exactly. And we see that Lord Chaitanya's associates, most of them were householders. And they were following that system also. And we have a few who weren't there, the householders in the strict sense, because they were outside of the whole system. So we have Haridas Thakur, who was not in the Varnashram system at all, no Varna, no Ashrama. We have Subhuti Rai, who was excommunicated. from Hindu society, because he got water from a Muslim sprinkled on his body, so that he wasn't in the Varnashram system. So we get a few examples like that, but most of the associates of Lord Chaitanya were acting within the system. So they were following this Varnashram Dharma, and they were also doing their bhakti. So the two things were not, let's say, conflicting, but we could say that the materialistic elements of that system were avoided. In other words, the goal was not kama, artha dharma kama, to enjoy with the senses. So that was omitted. And in its place we have satisfy Krishna, prema. So we don't give up desire, but we, let's say, transform kama into prema. Desire to serve ourselves becomes desire to serve Krishna. And so we can engage everything in our life for service to Krishna. So that's how the Vaishnav accommodates the Varnashram system. He has to maintain his body and whatever, live and work in society, so he follows that system. At the same time, he avoids the unfavorable elements and makes all the other elements favorable for advancing in devotional service. So in other words, he supports his body, following rules and regulations of Varnashram system, but makes his whole life pointed towards surrender to Krishna. And then there's no problem. So in other words, the two things go together. So in other words, we cannot have these two things independent. They have to go together. And the Vaishnava particularly puts more emphasis upon the bhakti aspect, and then the other aspects are adjusted according to bhakti. And at a certain point, when the devotee becomes qualified, then he can start renouncing his duties within that society. And so therefore we find renounced persons such as sannyasis or Babajis in Lord Chaitanya's movement also. So this is the one level with all these rules and regulations for society. So though these are on a lower level, they also influence bhakti. So the sinful activities are unfavorable for bhakti, and therefore they have to be avoided. So just as the Varnashram system avoids these sinful activities as being a cause of, all problems, so the devotee also has to avoid all these activities. And thus we have in our movement, Prabhupada, 4 regulator principles. So it's like a basic standard of just, so one can be steady in devotional service. This does not prevent people who cannot follow the regulator principles from practicing bhakti, but if they want to practice steadily in advance, then they will have to give up these activities. That's all. So everyone can participate, but at the same time, at a certain level, that you have to give up these activities. So in that way, we preach about bhakti, and in one sense we tell everybody, okay, you got to follow these standards and 4 regular principles. How many people are going to follow? It becomes very limited in one sense. And we see all these other religions, they don't say that, and it's got so many people following these other religions or whatever. People want to be spiritual, but then they say 4 regular principles. Wow, we don't want to follow that. It's very difficult, so then you won't get those people. So it kind of restricts us. Then of course we could argue, well, okay, but we're doing something higher, so therefore we're going to get less people, which is true also. We can't compromise in that way. At the same time, it's not that you can't practice anything in bhakti with the sinful activities. Your goal ultimately is to give them up, but at the same time, you can start at a lower level. So we can encourage anybody in any position of life, a lower tapagun, to also chant the holy name or do whatever he can, try to surrender to Krishna. But of course, obviously at a lower level, he won't be following all the regulator principles. Right? So therefore, that way, the system is somewhat adaptable. And at the same time, we do have, for the more serious persons, standards, certain minimum standards for their advancement. So the chanting of the holy name is for all the people of Kali Yuga. And all the people of Kali Yuga are the most fallen. The majority are in a very fallen state. As I see, they can't follow any of these regulator principles. They're, committing all the sinful activities, whatever. This is only the beginning of Kali Yuga. We're to speak of the end of Kali Yuga. So, but nevertheless, Nam Sankirtan is the Yuga Dharma even for these people somehow or other. So somehow we've got to engage all these people. So by the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the holy name can bypass all of this, this whole system. So that we see that even a person who was the lowest person, not even in the Varnashram system, by his bad karma, if he chants the holy name once, then he can destroy all of his karmas completely. So we do have a system with the holy name that if it's open up to everybody, even the most seemingly unqualified people, if they can chant purely once with faith, then they can immediately begin to give up those sinful activities, etc. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in one of his works, Bhakti Loka, he says that it's very difficult for people to give up their bad habits. Their bad habits are ingrained in their subtle body for many, 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 many births. These are called samskars, or impressions. And life after life, they gather these bad habits and attachments. And they go in the subtle body from one body to the other body, and they may start increasing every lifetime. So they get all these attachments that they can never give up. Very, very difficult. Then in this lifetime also, they get some experiences and impressions, and they get new things as well. So we got all these impressions, and it's very, very difficult to give them up. How you can purify anybody. And even if you use karma yoga, a very, very slow process. Many, many lifetimes to get from tamagun to rajagun even. And what to speak of jnana and yoga. If you're on this lower level, you can't even practice those systems. You cannot do yoga unless your mind is already controlled. And these people are not controlling their mind at all. So how do we do it? Okay, say bhakti yoga. But really to do bhakti yoga, the qualification is faith. And who has faith? Genuine faith in, Supreme Lord. Not most people. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, the main influence on people that can make them give up all these previous impressions and bad habits and samskaras is association of devotees. If they can associate with the devotees and get their mercy somehow or other, then they can actually start to give up. So he says, I have seen, and then he's witnessed that people that get good association, they give up all these bad habits. They transform themselves by the association of devotees. So that's also a very interesting principle that association is there. That's one thing. The other is Nam Sankirtan, chanting of the holy name. So these two things together are very, very powerful to transform even the people in the most hopeless state in Kali Yuga, afflicted by all of these bad activities. So the warning, the teaching here is that at least as much as possible we have to try to prevent these sinful activities from spreading, just as Parikshit did. So he limited it to these places, and then he prevented the places from popping up in Kali Yuga. So then in this way he prevented Kali from entering. Since that time, the rulers have not done that. They have to some degree encouraged these activities. They've not suppressed them at all, and they've been growing and growing ever since then. So obviously Kali Yuga is worse, degradation is more, sin is more, corruption is more, hoarding of money is more, exploitation is more, earth is reacting by causing more disturbances. So this is the result. So that's the physical aspect of material life for the human being. So if we want to have at least a peaceful life, then we have to restore this system to some degree that Pariksha was establishing and prevent these activities as much as possible. But we have our limitation because we are not the government. We can't control everything. But simultaneous with at least trying to prevent this on a national scale, all we can do is try on the individual scale, and the best way of doing that is transform people. And how we do that? Devotee association and Nam Sankirtan. Try those things, and then we can be successful. So that basically is also Lord Chaitanya's message. We just spread the holy name everywhere, give mercy everywhere, and the people of Kali Yuga, if they take it up, then they could transform their lives and give up all these sinful activities. Okay, any question?
Do you think that the current trend to make everything or everyone equal and to give everyone an equal opportunity, do you think that affects the spreading of the sinful activities? Because everyone, like you said before, in different classes or different environments, they had access to the control the sinful activity, to control sense gratification. But nowadays it's a trend to push everyone is equal, everyone can do whatever they want.
Equal sense gratification opportunities.
So do you think that trend to push that equality promotes the greater spreading of sinful activity?
Well, not necessarily, but we see, in other words, the lack of equality is also a result of the corruption itself, and that people who may be qualified don't get the chance to display their qualification because of poverty, exploitation, or whatever, you know. So we get people exploited like slaves, and they're working in factories or in some country of the world, you know, they're doing it like slaves, and then the people in the other countries are enjoying at their expense. So that's inequality there between nations. And then we get within a country itself, that we have the lower classes who are always complaining about, you know, police brutality and everything, which is also there. And then we have, because that takes place because of the social conditions, you know. One thing is the social conditions themselves that give rise to a lot of frustration. So this is a very complex problem that you want to raise the standard so that everybody has equal opportunity. But then what is that standard that we're trying to attain, actually? Is it financial or whatever? Because if it's just financial, and then it's just a higher standard of sense gratification, we could say, versus a lower standard. That's all.
You guys will spread sinful activities more.
Can, yeah.
More money to everyone.
If you just give them all more money, but indefinitely. Now, even if they don't commit more sinful activities, as we see in some societies, let's say in Sweden or something, so they're more or less equalized. I don't know what there's higher standard of living. So we don't see that there's more crime in the gross sense, you know. But at the same time, everyone's still frustrated, not any happier. So we see the higher people go, the wealthier they become, and the more corrupt they become also. And we see all these scandals in the newspapers all the time, all these people doing all these activities, and this person doing that, and the royal family's getting involved also even. So, yes. Yeah.
You mentioned that in previous times all four types of bad habits were also there, but they were less addictive or not addictive?
Well, yeah, you'd say they were regulated more. Yeah? And obviously the system allowed that Sudras, people in Tamagun, cannot control their senses so well as people in Sattvagun, so therefore the rules are less. And the people in Sattvagun, the Brahmanas, they have more rules to follow. So no violence means no meat eating, this and that. Everything is very, very strict. No drinking, things like this. Lowers, this is okay. Even Kshatriyas, they have some freedom like that. So it was allowed within that system because the people were not qualified for renouncing so much. But of course the goal is ultimately to reach that platform of sense control. So within that society also, even though the people on the lower level were, okay, they're more enjoyment, whatever, attached to their enjoyment, still, they also had recognition of that higher class. The Brahmana was respectable. He was the ideal. They couldn't attain that, but at least that was their ideal anyway. So they understood that they were on a lower level and they had to ascend to that level over many, many lifetimes. So we see, we see marriage life. So the marriage life means, okay, you have sex life within regulation, and then it's called dharma. And if you don't do it that way, then it's adharma. But then we find with the kshatriya, then there's exceptional that also. So they don't always have marriage, and they're outside of marriage, and it's still not a dharma like that. So, according to the qualification of the person in terms of gunas and varnas. And for bhakti, of course, then we have a higher standard, higher than the Brahman and Sattva gun. Our higher standards are even higher than that.
You mentioned how the four regulating principles are like the basics to have a society which goes towards bhakti and everything. And without the following those four principles, there is no question of yoga.
Yeah.
So, and it's easy to control that aspect in a small community of ISKCON, but I've observed in a few communities that when they start accepting other type of courses and the community becomes bigger and then in different countries.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, oh well, it's okay, they come drunk, it's okay. They're not following that, there's nothing wrong. It's part of the sugar as well. So what is the best way to stop that infiltration of breaking the principles into our communities?
Yeah. Well, the best thing probably is to keep it all separate. If you want to preach on that level, keep that level separate and have those like we have, in the material world, they have the real hopeless people. Then they have the halfway house where they're trying to rectify and get rid of their alcohol or their drugs or whatever like that. And then after that, they get into normal society. So they got a little halfway house like that. So in the same with spiritual life, we have people on the completely outside, then we have people that are partly okay, a little bit interested, then we have the people more dedicated, and finally we get the inner core who are very dedicated. Now if you mix them all together, then obviously those who are on the top level are going to start going down also. So we don't want to do that. Those who are very serious, we want to keep them and protect them. And to associate with the other people is called asatsanga, and asatsanga leads to corruption, so we can't have that. So, but nevertheless, we do have to be merciful to everybody and encourage everybody, but try to keep them separate.
So, how separate is that?
Well, so that there is no friendly, intimate association. So, sangha means that you associate in an affectionate way, and you establish relationships. So when you start establishing nice friendly relationships with people, then you start exchanging things. We have the 6 types of exchange: exchanging food, exchanging conversations, etc., exchanging gifts, and we get affectionate relationships, and then you start to get influenced by the other person. So when you start having very friendly relationships on an equal level, that's when you start getting the bad aspect of sangha, asatsanga. So then that has to be prevented. So if they're quite close together, then probably you're going to start getting, more intimate relationships going on, and therefore the influence will be more. So they have to be quite separate.
So you mean they can be nearby, but not
participating in the same programs all the time, and conversing all the time. They would be in a separate group with their own sangha, and then someone to guide them and to become purified, but not directly associating. That's probably the best thing. Or in a separate place even is better. Have one community there, one community over there somewhere else. So,
For the class, you mentioned that the way to make progress is to lift people out in the same
Generally, if you do associate with devotees, then you can progress. But as I said, an association is not just physical contact, it's the relationships also. Yeah? And so in Nectar of Instruction, Rupa Goswami says the 6 relationships of affection were giving and receiving things, giving and receiving food, giving and receiving knowledge. So if you have an exchange of that type of association between devotees, then we hope the person can progress. They may not progress if they've committed some aparads or something, which prevent that bhakti from growing, and it's very difficult, even if they have association, if they've not somehow corrected that aparad or apologized to the devotees or whatever. So that's also a factor that may prevent the association from having great effect. So mainly is to have some relationships, which include the transfer of knowledge, etc., instruction, etc. Obviously, if they're not going to take any instructions or not listen to any classes or anything, how they can advance? Live in the same community, but if they're isolated completely, nothing's going to happen. So there has to be some interaction. Okay. Hare Krishna.